Karen slapped Cashier over price change, didn't realize cameras were rolling for a news segment. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Karen stood in the narrow aisle of the community grocery store, her eyes fixed on the shelf in front of her, staring at the price tag of her favorite cereal. She had bought it every week for months, and she knew exactly how much it should cost. But today, something was different. The price had gone up by 50 cents, just 50 cents, but to Karen, it might as well have been $5. It wasn't about the money. It was the principle of the thing. She had been coming to this store for years, loyal to their prices, their products, and their customer service, and now, it seemed like they were trying to pull one over on her for no reason at all. Her fingers dug into the plastic packaging of the cereal box as she fumed, the 50-cent increase feeling like a personal affront. She turned sharply, her eyes scanning the store for the nearest employee, and when she spotted a young cashier at the register, she marched over with purpose. The store was quiet, just a handful of customers wandering through the aisles, and Karen took that as a sign that she could be heard. She was about to make sure everyone in the store knew exactly how she felt about this price change. "Excuse me," Karen snapped, her voice cutting through the air. The cashier, a young woman in her early 20s, looked up from scanning the items in front of her, startled by the sudden confrontation. "Yes, ma'am? How can I help you?" the cashier asked politely, her voice calm, trained in customer service to handle any complaints, no matter how unreasonable. "Help? You can help by explaining why this price is suddenly 50 cents more than it was last week." Karen's voice rose, her irritation clear. "I've been coming here for years, and now you're just going to mark up the price without any warning? What's the deal? Are you trying to scam your customers?" The cashier blinked in confusion, trying to keep up with Karen's rapid-fire accusations. "Ma'am, I'm not sure what happened with the price, but if there was a mistake, I can have a manager look into it." "A mistake? A mistake?" Karen interrupted, her face turning red as she took a step closer to the counter. "Don't try to talk to me like I don't know how stores operate. You've increased the price without any notice, and I'm not just going to stand here and pretend like that's okay. I want to know why. And I want it fixed, now." The cashier opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say another word, Karen's temper flared. She reached out and slapped the cashier's hand away from the register. The force wasn't enough to cause any real harm, but it was a sharp, sudden motion, and the sound of her hand connecting with the cashier's hand echoed in the otherwise quiet store. "Don't talk to me like I'm some kind of idiot," Karen yelled, her voice filled with venom as she leaned in closer to the cashier, her anger now taking full control. "This is ridiculous. I've had enough of being taken advantage of." The young cashier recoiled slightly, her face blanching in surprise. She had been trained to handle irate customers, but nothing could have prepared her for someone who would cross the line like this. As Karen ranted, her face flushed with fury, the cashier stood frozen, unsure of what to do. But the situation was far from over, because, unbeknownst to Karen, a local news crew had been filming a segment about the grocery store's community impact that morning, and their cameras were rolling in the background, capturing every moment. The crew had been filming an interview with the store owner just a few aisles over when Karen's outburst began. They had already set up the cameras, and the audio equipment was live, so when Karen's voice rose in anger, it was caught on tape. At first, the crew had been distracted by the interview, but as Karen's yelling grew louder and more intense, the cameraman had instinctively turned his lens in her direction, capturing her confrontation with the cashier in full. As Karen continued her tirade, her face twisted with frustration, the camera followed her every move. She stormed around the register, pointing at the shelf where the cereal was displayed, ranting about how stores were getting away with these small price hikes and how someone needed to take responsibility. She didn't notice the camera at first, too absorbed in her own fury, but the longer she went on, the more she became aware of the growing presence of the news crew. "Is that camera on me?" Karen snapped, suddenly noticing the camera pointing in her direction. "What the hell is this? Am I being filmed while I'm just trying to get some answers? Is this part of some marketing scheme? Are you all trying to make me look crazy?" The cameraman held his ground, keeping the camera steady as he filmed the scene. The sound of the camera's lens clicking with each movement only fueled Karen's rage. She didn't care that she was on camera, she was too far gone in her anger. The fact that a news crew was now documenting her meltdown felt like just one more indignity piled on top of the first. But what Karen didn't realize, in her blind fury, was that the footage she was so upset about would soon go viral, making her the focus of an entirely different type of attention than she had ever intended. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but if you could please calm down, I'll get a manager to help resolve the issue," the cashier said, her voice trembling but still trying to maintain professionalism. "I don't need a manager," Karen shot back, her hands waving in the air dramatically. "What I need is for you to stop trying to rip people off and give me my cereal at the old price. Or maybe I'll just start telling everyone I know about how your store is cheating customers." At this point, the store manager had arrived, but Karen's anger had escalated so quickly that he was left standing at the edge of the scene, unsure of how to intervene without making the situation worse. The tension in the air was thick, and the whole store seemed to be holding its breath. The camera crew, now realizing the significance of what was happening, continued to film, knowing that what they were capturing was going to be something that would resonate with the community, and beyond it. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Karen's tirade began to taper off. Her breath was ragged, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, but the storm of anger had started to pass. The store manager approached cautiously, speaking in a measured tone, hoping to defuse the situation. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but we've had a small price increase across the board, and I'm happy to explain it to you. If you'd like, we can give you a discount on your purchase today." But Karen, still fuming, shook her head furiously. "No, no, no," she said, her voice sharp. "This is about more than just a price change. This is about being treated with respect, and right now, I don't feel like I'm getting that from you or anyone else in this store." She threw her arms up in frustration and turned to leave, her face red and flushed with anger. As she stormed out of the store, still muttering to herself, the camera crew lowered their equipment, exchanging knowing glances. They had witnessed the entire outburst on film, and they knew it was going to be the centerpiece of their segment. They had intended to show the store's positive impact on the community, but instead, they had captured something entirely different. It would go viral within hours, sparking discussions about customer entitlement, poor behavior in public spaces, and the lengths some people would go to for something as small as a price increase. The aftermath was swift. The news clip, now posted on social media and shared across multiple platforms, quickly caught fire. Comments flooded in, with some defending Karen, claiming that the price hikes were unfair, while others lambasted her for her behavior. The video was watched by thousands of people, some sharing it in disbelief, others mocking her actions. In the days that followed, Karen found herself the subject of ridicule. Her outburst, captured for the world to see, had painted her as the villain in a story she had never intended to be part of. As for the grocery store, they weathered the storm. The manager issued a public statement apologizing for the incident, assuring customers that price changes would be communicated more clearly in the future. Meanwhile, Karen's name was plastered across social media, her outburst a symbol of an all-too-familiar public spectacle, a reminder that, in the age of social media, every action could be caught on camera, and nothing was truly private anymore. The aftermath of Karen's outburst in the grocery store hit her with the force of a wrecking ball, and she had no idea how quickly her actions would escalate into something much bigger than she could have ever anticipated. The incident, which had seemed like a small, isolated event at the time, soon became the talk of the town. What Karen had dismissed as a simple issue of principle, a price hike she felt was unfair, was now the subject of intense public scrutiny. It didn't take long for the video of her outburst to surface on social media, and once it was posted, it spread like wildfire, rapidly accumulating thousands of views, shares, and comments from people around the community and beyond. The footage from the news crew's cameras, capturing her slap to the cashier and the shouting match that followed, quickly made her the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. At first, Karen didn't realize just how viral the video had gone. She went about her day, continuing to engage in her usual routine, thinking that the incident was little more than an unfortunate altercation. She had been angry, yes, but she figured the cashier would simply report the incident, and maybe the manager would have a chat with her, and that would be the end of it. But as the hours passed, her phone began to buzz incessantly with notifications, messages from friends, acquaintances, and even strangers. The comments were overwhelming, and Karen could hardly keep up with the onslaught of notifications. She was confused at first, not understanding why everyone was suddenly so interested in her. When she finally opened one of the messages, it was a link to the video that had been posted by the news crew. Her heart sank as she watched herself on the screen, ranting about the price change and slapping the cashier's hand in a fit of anger. Her voice was unmistakable, her gestures exaggerated, and her face was a picture of entitlement. She could feel the color drain from her face as the reality of what she had done set in. The video was everywhere. People were commenting, sharing their opinions, some of them sympathetic to her frustration over the price hike, but most of them critical of her behavior. The comments ranged from mocking her for overreacting to condemning her for slapping the young cashier. It was clear from the reactions that the public was not forgiving. Karen could already feel the weight of her actions bearing down on her. It wasn't just a small misunderstanding, it had turned into a public spectacle, one that was quickly gaining traction and attracting the kind of attention she wasn't used to. As the day wore on, the notifications continued to pour in. Her friends sent her messages of concern, some of them offering words of support, while others tried to tell her that she needed to take responsibility for her actions. "Karen, this is bad," one of her friends texted. "You need to apologize, like, now. This is blowing up." But Karen, still reeling from the shock of seeing herself on that video, wasn't sure how to respond. She was angry, embarrassed, and confused all at once. How had it escalated to this point? How could something as insignificant as a price increase have triggered such a response from her? And now, how could she possibly make this right? By evening, the news segment had aired, and the video was featured prominently on local news websites, where it was shared by users across social media platforms. The store's name was mentioned several times, and people were commenting on how the store handled the situation. The store manager had issued a brief public statement, expressing regret over the incident and assuring customers that the price hike would be better communicated in the future. But for Karen, the manager's words felt like an afterthought compared to the firestorm she was now in the midst of. She had been caught on camera in a moment of pure rage, and there was no taking that back. The more Karen thought about it, the more she realized how much damage she had done. She had slapped the cashier, someone who was just doing her job, simply because of a small price increase. She had let her anger control her, and now the world could see exactly what she had done. She had always prided herself on being a person of dignity and control, but this was a complete departure from who she thought she was. She had allowed a moment of frustration to completely overwhelm her, and now she was facing the consequences of her lack of self-control. The more she watched the video, the more her anger shifted from the store to herself. She couldn't believe how she had allowed the situation to spiral out of control. Her sense of entitlement had blinded her to the reality of what was happening. She had been caught up in her own frustrations, believing that she deserved better, that she should be treated differently. But now, as the video continued to spread, she was being exposed for what she truly was, an entitled woman who thought the world should cater to her every whim. The next morning, the comments on social media were even worse. News outlets picked up the story, and Karen was suddenly the subject of widespread criticism. Karen's price tantrum became a trending topic on Twitter, with memes and jokes circulating online. The video of her slapping the cashier was replayed over and over again, and people were starting to use the hashtag #KarenSlapsBack, mocking her in a way she never thought possible. It felt like the whole world was laughing at her, and for the first time in her life, she didn't know how to respond. She had always been able to control her image, her narrative, but now, it felt like that image was being dismantled piece by piece, and she was powerless to stop it. She felt ashamed. She had never been one to shy away from confrontation, but this was different. It wasn't just a store clerk or a manager she had embarrassed, it was herself. Her first instinct was to try and brush it off, to ignore the comments, to pretend like it didn't matter. But deep down, she knew it did. The shame she felt was palpable, and she couldn't escape it. She had let herself become the villain, the very thing she despised. She had let her temper get the best of her, and now she was paying the price. Karen spent hours trying to figure out what to do. She couldn't just ignore the situation. She had to face it head on. Apologizing to the cashier, the store, and the public seemed like the only option, but she was unsure whether that would be enough. Could an apology undo the damage? Could she erase the image of herself screaming and slapping in front of a camera? That afternoon, she called the store to speak to the manager. She felt a knot in her stomach as she dialed the number, unsure of what to expect. When the manager answered, Karen hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Hi, this is Karen Taylor," she said, her voice hesitant. "I just wanted to apologize for my behavior yesterday. I acted completely out of line, and I'm really sorry for the way I treated your staff. I never should have let my frustration get the best of me, and I know it was wrong." The manager was quiet for a moment before responding, his tone neutral. "Thank you for calling, Miss Taylor. I'm glad to hear you understand the situation. We've been getting a lot of feedback about what happened, and I hope this serves as a reminder to everyone about how important it is to remain calm and respectful, no matter the circumstances." Karen felt a pang of guilt at his words. He wasn't angry, but the disappointment in his voice was enough to make her stomach drop. She could tell that her apology was expected, but not entirely accepted. She had done something that couldn't be easily undone, and now she was left to face the consequences, both in the court of public opinion and in her own heart. The realization hit her hard. No matter what she did now, she couldn't change the past. She had lost her temper, humiliated herself, and made a spectacle of what should have been a simple transaction. All she could do now was learn from the experience and, hopefully, try to rebuild the pieces of her reputation that had been shattered in that brief but unforgettable moment. The days following Karen's public meltdown in the grocery store were some of the hardest she had ever experienced. She had been accustomed to a life where her behavior, no matter how brash, was easily dismissed, overlooked, or excused. Her social status, her work life, and the reputation she had cultivated over the years had always allowed her to remain somewhat insulated from the consequences of her actions. But this incident, this very public display of entitled rage, shattered that illusion of invincibility. What had started as a small, insignificant moment of frustration had escalated into a viral spectacle, and no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, the reality of the situation continued to press down on her like an unrelenting weight. Every time she opened her phone, she was confronted with a barrage of comments, memes, and news articles about the incident. She had tried to brush it off at first, telling herself that people would forget about it soon enough, that the viral trend would pass and that she would be able to move on. But the more she tried to ignore the situation, the more it consumed her. It felt like every corner of her life had been invaded by the spectacle she had created. She couldn't escape it, whether it was in conversations with friends, colleagues, or even strangers who had seen the video. It was as if everyone had an opinion, and everyone was eager to share it with her. The constant barrage of comments was relentless. The video had been shared across multiple social media platforms, and there were even entire online communities dedicated to discussing the incident. The hashtag #KarenSlapsBack trended for days, with people mocking her every move. At first, Karen had laughed it off, convinced that it was all just temporary. This is what happens when people blow things out of proportion, she thought. But with each passing day, her frustration turned to shame, and that shame began to eat away at her from the inside out. One morning, after another sleepless night spent scrolling through the endless barrage of comments and articles about her, Karen made a decision. She could no longer hide from the reality of what had happened. Her actions had made her a laughingstock, and the longer she allowed herself to be paralyzed by the shame, the harder it would be to reclaim any sense of dignity. She needed to take responsibility, not just for her behavior in the store, but for the way she had handled the aftermath. She could have apologized immediately, taken accountability, and tried to minimize the damage, but instead, she had buried her head in the sand, hoping that it would all just blow over. Now, it was too late for that. The damage had been done, and she couldn't take it back. The only thing she could do now was face it head on. Karen sat down at her kitchen table, her fingers hovering over her phone. She had composed and deleted several messages already, unsure of how to approach the situation. She couldn't just apologize in passing, or offer a generic statement. It had to be genuine, it had to be thoughtful, and most of all, it had to be real. After a few moments of contemplation, she finally began typing. To the cashier and to the community, she wrote, "I want to sincerely apologize for my behavior last week. I allowed my emotions to get the best of me, and in doing so, I treated someone with disrespect when I should have been more patient and understanding. I was wrong, and I take full responsibility for my actions. I should have never let my frustration lead to such an outburst, and I deeply regret the way I acted. I want to learn from this experience, and I am committed to doing better moving forward." It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. She hit send, hoping that somehow, it would be enough to begin the process of making amends. But even as the message left her phone, Karen knew that the road ahead would not be an easy one. She couldn't undo the past, no matter how many heartfelt apologies she offered. The damage had already been done, and her reputation would likely never be the same again. Still, she knew that this was the right thing to do. The response to her apology was mixed. Some people appreciated her honesty, acknowledging that it was a step in the right direction. Others, however, remained critical, unwilling to let her off the hook so easily. The internet, as always, was unforgiving. Her apology wasn't enough to erase the anger and resentment that people felt toward her. They didn't care about her remorse, they cared about the spectacle she had created, and they were unwilling to let her escape the consequences. The memes continued, the jokes kept coming, and her name became synonymous with entitlement and rage. But amidst the noise, Karen found something unexpected. A few days after posting her apology, she received a message from the cashier, the very person she had slapped. The message was simple, but it was enough to make Karen's heart skip a beat. "I appreciate your apology," the cashier wrote. "It means a lot that you're taking responsibility for your actions. I know it was a difficult situation, and I'm just glad that we can move forward." For a moment, Karen couldn't believe what she was reading. After everything, after the video, after the embarrassment, the cashier, someone she had wronged in the most personal way, was offering her grace. It was a humbling experience, one that Karen would never forget. For the first time since the incident, she felt like she had taken a step in the right direction. She had expected condemnation, not understanding. She had expected rejection, not reconciliation. And yet, in this small moment, she found a glimmer of hope. Karen took a deep breath and sent a response. "Thank you for your kindness," she wrote. "I can't tell you how much your words mean to me. I truly regret what I did, and I'll do everything I can to make things right. I hope you know that I am committed to being better from here on out." The exchange didn't fix everything, of course. There were still countless people who had no interest in forgiving her, who would never forget what she had done. The video was still out there, still circulating, still being shared by people who didn't care about her apology. But the fact that the cashier, the person directly impacted by her behavior, had found it in herself to offer understanding gave Karen a sense of peace she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was a start. In the days that followed, Karen began to take small steps toward changing her behavior. She reached out to the store's management and offered to help with community outreach efforts, hoping to contribute positively to the very store she had nearly ruined with her outburst. She volunteered at local events, attended meetings about customer service, and even began to focus on developing more patience in her personal life. It wasn't easy, old habits die hard, and Karen's natural inclination toward entitlement and impatience didn't disappear overnight. But she was determined to learn from her mistakes and become a better person because of them. The road ahead was long, and Karen knew she would face challenges. The internet had a long memory, and it wasn't going to let her forget what had happened in that grocery store. But Karen had come to understand that she couldn't control the narrative that others created about her. She could only control her own actions, her own growth, and her own journey toward redemption. And while the journey would be hard, she was ready to face it. Karen stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, staring at her reflection with a sense of disbelief. The woman who stared back at her seemed like a stranger, her features familiar, but her eyes filled with something foreign, something she hadn't seen before: vulnerability. The pride and confidence she had once worn like armor had been stripped away, replaced by a quiet reflection of someone who had been humbled. The video of her outburst in the grocery store, now a viral sensation, had etched a permanent mark on her reputation, one that no amount of money, influence, or charm could erase. The realization that she had been caught in a moment of pure entitlement, exposed for the world to see, hit her harder than she could have imagined. She had thought of herself as someone who controlled her own narrative, but now, her narrative had been taken from her. And the world was watching as it played out. The days since the incident had been long and painful. She had spent hours reading the comments online, trying to come to terms with the way people viewed her. Some comments were supportive, offering understanding and pointing out that everyone had bad days, but many others were harsh, unforgiving, and relentless. People had even started using her face from the video in memes, mocking her, turning her into the very symbol of entitled, unreasonable behavior. The hashtag #KarenSlapsBack had gained even more traction, and with each passing day, it seemed like the internet was growing more and more obsessed with her downfall. The shame she had felt in the aftermath of her outburst was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. For the first time in her life, she couldn't hide from the consequences of her actions. She had no control over how she was being portrayed, and that lack of control was terrifying. As she prepared herself for the day ahead, Karen knew she couldn't continue living in the shadow of what had happened. She had been offered forgiveness from the cashier, and that small act of grace had made a lasting impact on her. But the road to redemption wasn't as simple as a heartfelt apology and a single act of kindness. She knew she had to show the world that she was capable of change, that she could learn from her mistakes, and that she was willing to take responsibility for the damage she had caused. She had thought of herself as above reproach for so long, and now she had to face the reality that she wasn't immune to the rules of decency and respect that everyone else had to follow. The decision to make things right wasn't an easy one. She had been racked with guilt, questioning her own motivations, wondering if her apology had been enough or if it had come too late. She couldn't undo the way she had treated the cashier, the way she had lost her temper and embarrassed herself in front of an entire store. But what she could do was take steps to make amends, not just with the people she had hurt but with herself. She wasn't proud of who she had been in that moment, and she knew that it was time to prove that she was capable of growth, of change, and of being better. Karen reached out to the grocery store, requesting a meeting with the manager. She knew she had to do this in person, to apologize face-to-face and demonstrate that she was committed to making things right. She wasn't sure if the store would welcome her apology or if they would even want to engage with her after the public fallout, but she had to try. The manager agreed to meet her, and after a brief exchange of pleasantries, they sat down in the store's office, the weight of the situation hanging in the air. "I want to start by saying how sorry I am for the way I acted that day," Karen began, her voice steady but filled with sincerity. "There is no excuse for what I did. I allowed my emotions to take over, and I lost sight of the bigger picture. I understand that my behavior wasn't just disrespectful to your staff, it was disrespectful to your store, to your customers, and to the community. And for that, I am truly sorry." The manager nodded, his expression neutral but not unkind. He had seen the video, and he knew what had happened. "I appreciate you coming in to talk about this, Karen. It's not easy to admit when you've made a mistake, especially when it's as public as this one. But the truth is, your actions affected more than just the cashier. It affected the reputation of this store, and it hurt the trust that our customers have in us. We've worked hard to create a positive environment for our community, and when something like this happens, it sets us back." Karen nodded, taking in his words. She had expected some level of criticism, and she wasn't offended by it. She knew he was right. Her actions had gone beyond a simple altercation at the checkout counter. They had reverberated throughout the community, affecting not just the employees but also the customers who relied on the store. The impact of her behavior was far-reaching, and the realization was sobering. "I understand that," Karen said, her voice softening. "And that's why I want to make things right. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I don't just want to apologize. I want to take responsibility for my actions and show that I can do better. I want to help this store, in any way I can, to rebuild the trust that I've broken. If there's any way I can contribute, whether it's through community outreach or supporting your efforts to engage with customers, I want to be part of the solution. The manager looked at her for a long moment, his gaze thoughtful. It was clear that he appreciated her sincerity, even if the damage couldn't be undone. I think it's a step in the right direction, he said finally. We're going to have to work hard to regain the trust of our customers, and your involvement could help. But it will take time. You're not going to change everyone's mind overnight. You've got to prove, through your actions, that you're committed to being better. Karen left the meeting with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in days. The manager had been understanding, and though the road to redemption would be long, she now had a path forward. She knew she couldn't erase the past, but she could start building something new, something better, and she was determined to do whatever it took. The video continued to circulate online, the memes and jokes continuing to make their rounds, but Karen no longer let it consume her. Instead, she focused on the small steps she could take to make amends. She spent time volunteering at community events, offering her time and resources to causes that helped people in need. She reached out to local organizations and offered to help them with their outreach efforts, using her platform, however small it was, to support causes that mattered. She knew she couldn't undo her actions, but she could use the lessons she had learned to make a positive impact. It wasn't easy. Every now and then, she would hear someone mention the incident, or she would catch a glimpse of a meme online. But each time, she reminded herself that change was a process, and she was in the middle of it. She had apologized, she had taken responsibility, and now it was time to let her actions speak louder than her mistakes. In the end, Karen realized that the greatest lesson from the entire experience wasn't about repairing her image or salvaging her reputation. It was about learning the value of humility and accountability. She had been humbled by the world's reaction to her behavior, but it was that very humbling experience that allowed her to grow. She couldn't change the past, but she could shape the future. And as the weeks passed, Karen found herself slowly, steadily, rebuilding not just her reputation, but also her sense of self-worth, grounded in a newfound respect for others and for herself.